Hello, and welcome to another episode of the CSM podcast, also known as the Penny Podcast. I'm Camila. I'm a 10th grader and a staff writer for the Sidekick newspaper.
I'm Kelly Way. I'm a 12th grader and I'm editor-in-chief of the Sidekick.
I'm Andrés. I am an 11th grader and I am this Coppell student media web producer.
Okay, and so this podcast, the Penny Podcast, is a weekly hybrid podcast that incorporates elements of interview and conversation with rotating hosts. So our guest for this episode is Anika Arutla for her article Social Environmental Downturns to Wall, and it's published under our opinion section. Anika?
Hi, I'm Anika, and I'm in 11th grade, and I am a staff writer on Coppell Student Media.
Okay, so for our first segment, the headline rundown.
Our first story comes from Sarah Wu, and she wrote an article titled Teacher of the Week, Watkins Using Math to Teach Life Lessons.
I actually read this story, and I think it's really cool that you can even use math to teach life lessons. Usually when I think of teaching life lessons, that tends to fall more in, the history, English, kind of like the humanities, and math tends to be this very rigid, difficult to. It's not a lot of students' favorite subjects, I know. Just because it's so rigorous and it's so to the point. So I think it's cool that he can kind of use it and apply it in a way that isn't just so technical. I think that's great.
Definitely, that's an emotional side to things.
I think that's awesome.
Not seen.
I kind of want to explore that, the emotional side of math. That's really interesting, actually. I was gonna say weird, but it's not weird. It's just interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so our second story comes from
Shravya Mahesh. Theater students overcome obstacles and enthrall audiences with Shakespeare play. So Camila, are you involved with this play? I know you're in theater department.
Yes, so the show is a Broadway-bound class show.
Uh-huh.
So it's all of the students who are in that class. All of them have not necessarily been in a show. They just showed interest in theater, and that class is just straight acting. So we don't sing or anything,
uh-huh.
and. It was a struggle because we were supposed to have it in March, but we had a conflict with the Beauty and the Beast musical, so they pushed it forward another month. And
the Beauty and the Beast, that the first
the
one
FUMC.
Okay, yeah, that they're holding. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so we had to have it a month sooner than planned, and that's 6 weeks in class, so an hour and a half whenever we have 8 days. And there's several different characters. Technically the show is only performed by 3 people, but since it's a class show, we just,
Mm-hmm.
I played, what did I play? So I had to rap about Othello, the Moor of Venice, and then I was a cheerleader, and I was Cressida from Troilus and Cressida. I had one line. And then I played a fat guy in Hamlet, Polonius, yeah.
Oh, that's so funny. Well, actually, I think that's so cool. So it's kind of you just put this humorous twist on these classic Shakespearean plays, right?
And it was a huge hit. We actually thought it was going to be kind of a train wreck because we weren't ready. But then we had Tech Week, which is a week that you come in after school and you just rehearse over and over and over again, and everything just came together.
That's great.
Yeah, I went to the show. I like the audience engagement side of things.
Yes, we had a lot of audience participation. I'm glad they wrote stories about that. It was a very small thing, but it was huge to us. So, all right, we're going to go on to the CSM interview. And my first question for you, Anika, is would you consider yourself a very politically invested person?
Actually, yes, because in today's environment, at least, it's kind of hard not to be politically invested because it's so easy to lean towards one side or the other because of the polarization that's happened. And I feel that being politically invested is kind of a way to talk to people in today's world. So I don't think I got really politically invested until I got into high school, or recently until last year until I joined Sidekick. Prior to that, I always thought I was liberal, as everyone should be, and not should be, but as teenagers I feel that's just what we tend to lean towards.
Yeah.
And I grew up in Washington D.C. and the environment there was very, very liberal. It was very stark contrast as to what it is here. And so yeah, I think but now I'm seeing both sides to the story. As you grow older, that's just how it happens. So yeah, I think I am pretty politically invested.
That's really interesting. Washington D.C.? I've been there. It's a pretty place.
I'd like to go.
Yeah.
So, what motivated you to write about the wall?
Well, we talk about the wall a lot in all of my classes, specifically like econ, because my teacher, at least, he likes to talk a lot about like the political side and connect it back to economics, and so he like brought up pretty good points, and I feel like the wall, I mean, it's just like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's just very like, it like brings like a face or like a physical component to like an issue that's like been around for so long, and I feel like people are now starting to see the issues because of the wall and because of Donald Trump, and so I think it's just very interesting, and yeah.
Yeah, and I think like the symbolic weight of having a wall in the United States is huge too, because like you said, like you put it in a really great way. It is like this physical like manifestation of, you know, what a lot of people consider to be radical ideology, xenophobia, you know, and I also think like sometimes the symbolism of that wall tends to overshadow like the actual logistics and technicalities of building a barrier between Mexico and the United States, because you know, just kind of talking to some of my friends, the ones that aren't, you know, super politically invested, it just seems like we just automatically code like the wall as like a good thing, or I mean a bad thing, or we think it's like representative of like Trump's corrupt administration. There's not like a lot of actual, I feel like, information and research that really like explains like, okay, like here is why it's bad, or like, you know, possibly why it's good, or what we can do to make it, you know, less severe and harsh, if that makes sense. So I actually really appreciated that like side of your article, because you like really kind of like explain like not only just like why it's bad in your opinion, or, you know, why it has certain consequences, but, you know, specifically what those consequences were. So
Yeah, I think a wall is something that has definitely been present in history. Walls do represent excluding people, keeping people out. And we've had a lot of representation in history of how that's failed. The Berlin Wall, the China Wall, they just didn't work. So if this does go through, I personally don't think it will. It's a nice idea to have a tighter border security, but in a physical wall, I don't think it's very practical. So yeah.
You mentioned your econ teacher and kind of like how he talks about the wall. So, I mean, in regards to like this article, at least, how have like your friends, classmates, teachers, family, how have they all reacted?
Well, my family and my friends, they know what my ideologies are, and I was actually kind of on the fence about writing about it because it obviously shows which way I lean, and I didn't mean it to be that way. I just try to make it as factual as I can. So, my family, I mean, they kind of see the things the way I see them, as like I grew up with them, and so it was okay with them. And my friends, I mean, it was fine with them. Like, no one really reacted to it because it's just, I don't think it was as hard hitting as I thought it would be.
Yeah.
And my econ teacher, I'm pretty sure he hasn't read it yet, or else he would come at me in class or something. But yeah, I mean, it's just, I feel like this topic is very touchy, and I definitely, when I wrote it, I was like, should I be writing this? Is it like worth it? And I think that we need to see the facts. Like, I think someone should also write an article about why it should be built, so you can see both sides. I just wanted to throw out why it shouldn't be. So, yeah.
Yeah, true. And I mean, also, so you said you were kind of on the fence about this. So was this coming from like a place of like fear of writing something so political and like controversial?
Yeah, basically. Because it's very, very, very controversial.
Yeah.
Very,
sure.
And especially in Texas, I feel. Because
Symbolic, yeah.
Yeah, symbolic. And it's very symbolic in Texas. And yeah, it's just very, very substantial, as in like it could go either way and it could offend either way. And so I talk about it in my article too, how the wall, it causes social problems, not just like, oh, it's like a physical wall. And I don't know, it's just very, very political, and I was really on the fence about it because it can go either way.
Yeah. And was your purpose when writing this article to simply state the facts of the impacts of the wall, or did you want to seek to alarm and wake the readers with the dire consequences that the wall might insinuate.
I think the second part of what you said, because it does cause a lot of consequences, because it's not just environmentally bad, as I put in my article. Like, a lot of people wrote, or like a lot of groups like the Sierra group, they wrote to Congress and said, like, there's things wrong if you built this wall, like, so much can happen. And so I think people aren't aware of that. They just think, oh, we're keeping the immigrants out, they're not going to take our jobs, it'll be fine, like, we're in this bubble, like, it'll be good. But I just think that it'll further just destroy our reputation also, in terms of like, international affairs, as like other countries will view us as not very open or welcoming as we should be, as America was built on freedom, and immigration was our like biggest slogan, I guess, to get people to come. And so, yeah.
All right, and so we've been talking about the wall a lot, but what are some alternate solutions that you think might work?
Increasing just like border control near the border, not like just build the wall, but like increasing background checks to who comes into the wall. Because I think the biggest, because I was talking to my economics teacher, and we were talking about how even if you built the wall, people will try to get in either way. So if you get a plane ticket to Canada, and it's cheaper to come in that way, just like cross the Canadian-American border. And I think that this wall won't be effective. So like increasing background checks will definitely help, and increasing like the security down there. And yeah.
I think something that we could also possibly consider is, you know, a lot of people with like illegal immigration, some of the reason for immigrating illegally at all is because the process for naturalization and obtaining citizenship is sometimes convoluted and difficult. I'm not very knowledgeable about this, but I do think, you know, if we could redirect some of, you know, the funding that's being put towards this wall to maybe like expanding the staff of like who, you know, the government, the federal staff that's in charge of, you know, these naturalization processes, or somehow, you know, improving the overall like just the way, you know, the like immigrants can kind of achieve citizenship, it might actually motivate them or dissuade them from you know, considering illegally immigrating as like a viable option at all. So I mean,
I think the wall, the reason why it got so much hate was because it really was only planned to be stationed on one border. So as a Mexican, when I first heard it on the news, I wasn't really politically aware back then. I heard that the wall was to stop Mexican illegal immigrants or prevent them from coming in so easily, even legally. Do you think that the wall might have had less of a how do I word this? Less of a controversial stigma around it if it had been all over the place, like just a wall all around?
No, I don't. I think it was basically because I think the majority of the illegal immigrants that we get are from Mexico, and Trump is obviously trying to target that one border that we have, because Canadians, like, we don't associate with them as much as we think that we do, because they obviously don't try to cross the border. Like, we, like, even Americans, we joke about crossing to Canada because obviously it's like better.
I remember like all the jokes and memes, like once like Trump got elected, like a lot of people were like, well, like they like crash the Canadian like immigration website. Yeah. So
why do you think the idea of a physical wall appealed to so many Americans?
Well, as I stated before, it's just like illegal immigrants are taking over jobs, and that's what they are concerned about, and they're like the primary cause of like crime rates, and they're associated with all this negative connotation, and that's not true for the most part. I see that where they're coming from, but I don't think the wall is the best way to stop it, and it just appealed because it was just a solution that someone came up with, and it was just the media thing that they grabbed onto.
I always thought that you know, like the whole political scene can get really like complicated, and if you're not like intimately involved in it, like if you're just a regular citizen, it like so much of what goes on behind the scenes like you don't see, and it's often there's a lot of talk about like it's shady or like it's like you don't get to know like fully what's going on, or you feel like progress is taking so long and you're just not seeing results. So I think it can be really attractive for someone like Trump to very boldly say we'll just build a wall, because like a wall is easier to understand than a bunch of legislation, bills, and codes. That's like for like a normal citizen who's just somewhat politically aware, that sounds like progress is being made, and that sounds like like literally like a solid like barrier that can be built to solve the problem, and that bypasses a lot of the political intricacies that might kind of confuse everyone. So
Exactly. It's an issue that could possibly be literally seen.
Yeah.
It's a wall.
Yeah, exactly.
And it sparks discussion. And speaking of which, can we discuss the government shutdown for a moment? And did you consider that when writing your story? Was it around that time frame?
Yeah, it was. I think that the government shutdown tied very closely with the wall, so I knew it had to go either way. And the government shutdown isn't as controversial, in my opinion, as the wall, because the government shutdown, the government just shut down. And it was because of the wall, because Trump wanted to build that wall. He was like, we're going to shut down until we get that wall.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the wall was more immediate and more like direct than the government shutdown, so.
I think that personally my opinion has always been that the entire political scene would be very different if people all around, left, right, liberal, conservative, whatever, took the time to, number one, do their research, and number two, think about the consequences. A lot of the time we tend to live in a very today kind of mindset. We think about today, we think about the government shutdown and the people who were affected by it, and we don't think about the future. So like people who are advocating for this wall don't think about the repercussions that could come in the future. America, if I'm historically accurate here, fought for the destruction of the Berlin Wall because of what it did when it was there, and I don't think that anyone has taken into consideration that maybe other countries would want to would start pleading to America, please take down this wall. You
Mm-hmm.
did it to somebody else. We're
Yeah.
doing it to you now.
That's true.
All right, so if that's all the questions that we have for Anika, I think we're going to have her read a little excerpt from her story.
Okay. Building a wall will only drive a wedge deeper into this already divided country and could be completely avoided if we found another way to solve our problems, such as by implementing more intensive background checks on immigrants and securing the entrances into the United States.
It's a really beautiful written excerpt there.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you so much for joining us in this third episode of the Penny Podcast. All links to the articles talked about will be provided in the description box below. And make sure you join us next Thursday for another installment of the Penny Podcast. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Woo.